They said the temple bell could call the heavens themselves. 1 strike for mercy, 2 for truth, 3 for death. For centuries, no monk had dared ring it more than once. Until the night he heard a child crying beyond the altar, a sound too small for gods to notice. The storm outside had already drowned the valley. He thought the sound was wind at first, then realized it was a prayer, caught in a throat too weak to finish it. He struck the bell once. The temple shook. The crying stopped. For a heartbeat, he believed he had done right. Then came the second sound, not echo, not thunder, an answer, but wrong, too deep, too human. The bell hummed like bone under pressure, and the statues along the walls began to sweat candlelight. Every offering bowl spilled its incense onto the floor, as though the gods had risen in haste and found themselves uninvited. The monk fell to his knees, clutching his ears as the bell kept ringing on its own. The sound filled him, not through his ears but through his ribs. It spoke a language that no scripture had ever dared to write. When the noise finally died, the storm was gone. And outside, where the mountains should have been, the sky hung open, empty, trembling, and listening back. Every bell has an echo, but not every echo belongs to heaven. This is the story of the monk who struck a sacred bell seeking mercy and heard the wrong God answer. If stories like this find you in the quiet hours, subscribe to Reimagined Orient. Each day, we awaken another forgotten myth whispered through rain, stone, and faith gone astray. Leave a like to keep the lanterns burning, and tell us in the comments, from which city do you listen to the wind tonight? Now, let the sound of the bell return. Chapter 1. The Bell That Waited Too Long. For years the bell hung silent above the valley, its bronze skin greening under the slow breath of rain. The ropes that once pulled its tongue had rotted into pale threads. Spiders made their prayers there instead. Pilgrims climbed the temple steps to leave coins, whispering to the silence, because no monk dared to summon a god that had stopped answering. He was the youngest keeper in a line of keepers who no longer believed. Each dawn, he swept the courtyard, emptied rainwater from the offering bowls, polished the cracked statues until their eyes looked nearly alive. At night he sat beneath the bell shadow and listened to its shape hum with the wind. He told himself the hum was enough, that faith, like an ember, could be kept alive by memory alone. When the storms came, they came without warning. Rain hurled itself against the roof like stones thrown by an angry crowd. The air smelled of iron and old thunder. He lit the lamps along the hall, one by one, until the temple glowed like a lantern lost in the sea of night. That was when he heard it, a child's cry, faint, somewhere beyond the altar. He followed the sound through corridors that bent like questions. The cry led him to the main hall, where the great bell hung. Water leaked from the beams, pooling on the floor in thin, trembling mirrors. No child waited there, only a draft that smelled of wet ash and something sweet, like fruit left too long on an altar. The sound came again, higher this time, close enough to make his breath catch. He looked up. Inside the bell, a small light moved. It flickered like a candle drowning in air. Without thinking, he stepped onto the platform and reached for the rope. The hemp felt cold and alive beneath his hands. Only once, he whispered, "For mercy." He pulled. The bell answered with a note so pure it hurt. The air folded inward. He felt it strike through his chest, pushing his heartbeat aside. For an instant he saw the valley below as the gods must have seen it. Roofs shining with rain, fields breathing steam, every drop of water, a mouth open in prayer. Then came the second note, unbidden. It did not sound like bronze, it sounded like breath, deep, deliberate, and wrong. The statues along the walls began to sweat wax. Their mouths moved, forming words he couldn't hear. The candles burned straight upward without smoke. The light twisted into a column, climbing toward the bell's mouth. From that column, a voice uncoiled, not the child's, not divine, but something in between. "Who called us?" it asked. The monk fell to his knees. "I asked for mercy." A pause heavy enough to bend the air. "Then why do you sound afraid?" He bowed until his forehead touched the wet floor. "Because I have no answer worthy of heaven." The light dimmed. The air steadied. Then the bell rang once more, softer now, almost kind. He looked up. The floor was dry. The hall was empty. Only the smell remained. Sweet, heavy, impossible to name. Outside, the storm had broken apart, but not the clouds. They hung low over the valley, pale and wrong. The wind no longer came from the mountains. It came from the temple itself. When he stepped outside, the sound followed him down the stairs, a quiet tolling that matched his heartbeat. He did not notice until he reached the last step that his shadow had stayed behind. Chapter 2. The echo that borrowed his mouth. Dawn found the valley ash-pale, as if the night had rubbed out its outlines. He climbed the temple stairs again with rain-damp robes and a heartbeat that kept time with a bell no one heard. At the gate, he paused. The courtyard looked ordinary, broom propped against a pillar, puddles collecting sky. Then he noticed the birds, perched along the eaves, beaks open, silent, waiting for a sound that would feed them. Villagers gathered at the lower steps, faces upturned like bowls. "Master," an old woman called, "tell the bell to rest. We were awake all night." He frowned. It didn't ring. Murmurs trembled through the crowd, a wind through thin reeds. A child pressed his palms to his ears. "But it's ringing now," he whispered. Inside. The monk felt it too. Deep as marrow, patient as tide. He crossed to the bell hall. The rope lay slack, the bronze cool. Yet the floorboards thrummed beneath his feet, as if a huge animal slept under the temple. The statues along the walls had changed in some almost imperceptible way. Their lips looked softer. A sheen like breath glazed their eyes. He bowed to them instinctively, the way one greets witnesses before confessing. When he spoke, he did not mean to. "Mercy," he said. His voice wasn't his own, warmer, wider, as though the hall had shaped it on its way out. The villagers at the door straightened. Several began to weep without understanding why. The sound in their bones quickened, a note resolving into something like hope and warning in the same breath. He tried again. "Be calm." The syllables rang like metal dipped in water. Somewhere behind the statues, wax cracked. A thin thread of clear resin slid from a wooden lip and pooled on the sill, sweet-smelling as overripe fruit. A young man stepped forward, eyes wide. "Master, what did you do to my father?" The monk blinked. "Your father? He's been dead 2 winters. Last night, Mother heard him knocking on the wall." The monk's mouth filled with rain taste and copper memory. He swallowed. "I did nothing." But he remembered the second note, the wrong breath, the way the storm had paused to listen back. He felt a pressure behind his teeth, gentle but insistent, like a word choosing a throat. He turned away and the pressure eased. He faced the bell and it returned. Not a haunting, a hinge. He sent the crowd home with soft instructions. Boil rice, burn a single stick of incense, leave both by the threshold, do not speak first. They did as he asked because his voice had acquired the authority of weather. That night the village smelled of smoke and grain. Thin threads of steam rose from doorways like prayers learning to stand. No one slept. Houses ticked with cooling wood and quiet expectation. The monk waited alone in the hall. He tied a fresh length of rope to the bell's tongue, hands moving with the sobriety of a surgeon threading a suture. He did not pull. Instead, he listened to the floor. Beneath the boards, the heartbeat returned, slower now, as if whatever listened had learned patience. Lantern light filmed the bronze like winter upon a pond. In that light, his shadow leaned forward, still on the step where it had stayed, and watched him work. Near midnight, footsteps climbed the stairs, hesitant, barefoot. A woman stood in the doorway holding a bowl of rice with both hands. "He won't eat," she said. "He knocks, but he won't come in." Her tongue struggled against the words as if they were too large. "He says, the gods got the address wrong." The monk's skin prickled. "Set the bowl there." He pointed to the threshold. "And ask him what he forgot." She did. Silence thickened. Then the bowl's surface dimpled as if something invisible leaned to smell it. The monk felt a phrase tighten inside his chest. He tried to hold it, the way one holds back a cough. It forced its way through anyway, low, resonant, unmistakably from the bell and not his throat. "Say my name the way you said it the day before I left." The woman's knees softened. She sank to the floor, bowl cradled in her lap. "Haru," she whispered, voice breaking on the old vowel. The rice shifted, a single grain rising and falling as if breathing. She laughed through tears, small and startled, like someone hearing rain in a desert city. Outside, along the ridge, other doorways exhaled together. Knocks, sobs, 100 private reconciliations taking root. The monk pressed his palms together. Gratitude and dread shared the same cup in his chest. He understood at last. The bell had not opened heaven. It had opened addresses. Prayers misdelivered for years were finding their way back through him. The right ghosts answering wrong gods, the wrong gods borrowing right mouths. The world would call it miracle. He who had heard the second note called it risk. Toward dawn, the floor's heartbeat faltered, then steadied, like a messenger catching breath between deliveries. He lay the mallet beside the rope and spoke into the bronze as one speaks into a sleeping ear. "I will ring once at sunset, only once." The bell held his reflection and did not agree or refuse. As he stepped outside, the first light bled into the valley. His shadow remained in the doorway, listening. He did not ask it to follow. From the huts below, the day's first fires caught. Smoke rose in neat gray sentences. Somewhere down there, a mistake had been postponed, a name reheard correctly, a bowl becoming lighter as it learned to be empty. He closed his eyes and felt the wrong god breathe in time with his own. And from the north, where the mountains refused maps, another bell answered, distant, deeper, carrying a question that bent the morning. Who taught you our speech? Chapter 3. The Mountain. That spoke back. He froze on the temple steps. That second bell note rolled through the valley like thunder, remembering where to go. It was far, days away perhaps, but too deliberate to be accident. It came again, slower, each toll a deep inhalation. The birds fled in ribbons. The monk's old statues in the courtyard turned their heads toward the sound, as though answering a command. He stood until the echo died. Then the silence that followed did not feel like absence. It felt like a question waiting for its next line. The villagers came running up the slope. "Master," one called, "we heard another temple." "The hills are waking." A child clung to her mother's robe and whispered, "Did the other god hear wrong too?" The monk looked past them to the northern peaks where clouds gathered like bruises. "Not wrong," he said, "just curious." He returned to the hall. The bronze bell glowed faintly as if someone had whispered directly into it. The rope swayed without wind. When he placed his hand on the rim, a vibration passed through his skin and settled behind his ribs. "They heard," it said. "No sound, only meaning. They want to understand the echo." He sat cross-legged before the altar and tried to pray, but prayer felt redundant. Every breath in the valley was already petition. He listened instead. The wooden floor expanded and contracted with small sighs. Outside, insects held their songs at bay. Even the air waited. The gods, if they could still be called that, had turned their ears toward the human world. At dusk, he lit the lamps and opened the gate to the courtyard. A wind from the north carried with it a dry scent of stone and old rain, like the inside of a cavern. "You came," he said aloud, unsure to whom. The bell answered with a single tremor, so soft it might have been imagination. Then came the voices, not from the sky, but from the ground. "You opened a door with sound," they said. "We have no mouths, only echoes. Teach us how to speak true." He bowed until his forehead touched the dirt. "If I am to teach you, what will you give in return?" The air trembled. "Memory," they said. "We will show you the world before gods and men learned each other's names." The ground beneath him shifted. The flagstones became cold, translucent. Beneath the surface he saw light moving like slow rivers. Images flared, mountains breathing, oceans humming in sleep, the first bell being cast from molten sky. He glimpsed the pattern that joined them all, a rhythm older than any prayer. When the vision faded, he was alone again, though the night no longer felt empty. His skin hummed with the same slow cadence as the mountain's voice. He rose and climbed to the bell. "If you wish to speak through me," he said quietly, "learn gentleness. The human ear is fragile." The bell pulsed once, agreeing. The rope lifted by itself, then fell still. Below in the village, people began to hear whispers in the grain of their wooden walls, in the creak of their floorboards, in the wind threading their eaves. None of it was frightening. It was like hearing one's name pronounced correctly after years of mishearing. That night he dreamed he stood between two bells, the temples and the mountains. Both waited for him to choose which to ring next. The air was heavy with the smell of fruit and metal. He woke with his hands clasped around nothing and the taste of bronze on his tongue. At sunrise, mist filled the valley. The villagers watched from their doors as he ascended the steps to the bell. They saw him pause halfway, listening to something no one else could hear. When he reached the platform, he did not pull the rope. He simply whispered, "Once for mercy, twice for truth." The first note spread outward like breath. The second folded inward like a heart, closing around memory. In the pause that followed, a third sound answered from the north, deeper, sorrowful, human. The monk looked up. "Then even the gods can learn regret," he said. He knew now that the world would not stay silent again. The bells were speaking to each other, trading lessons, testing what it meant to pray. And somewhere between their tones, his own heartbeat had disappeared into theirs. Chapter 4. The God That Forgot Its Own Name. The next morning the valley lay under a quiet too deep to trust. No wind stirred the incense trails curling from village doors. Even the river seemed unsure whether to move. The monk sat at the temple threshold watching the mist slide over the fields, waiting for the next bell note to rise from the north. It did not come. By midday he began to wonder whether he had imagined it, the second bell, the exchange of voices. He climbed the stairs again, slower this time, feeling the wood sigh beneath his bare feet. The great bell waited, dull and heavy, its bronze filmed with dew. He reached to steady it, and warmth bled under his fingers. A single drop of water hung from the rim. It glowed faintly before falling, leaving behind a small mark that wasn't corrosion or soot. He leaned close. The mark shaped itself into a curve, then another, until it formed a simple character. Who? He stepped back. The air behind him bent inward, a pressure without wind. Then the floor spoke, grain cracking into syllables. "We called you first." He swallowed. "Who are you?" The bell swayed once, lightly, as if breathing. From somewhere within the metal came the faint sound of a voice testing a word it did not yet know. Then a whisper, dry as dust, moving through stone. "We don't remember. That is why we answered wrong." The monk knelt. "You were the gods of this mountain." "Were," the bell agreed. "But names erode. Offer us one and we will learn again." He closed his eyes. "A name is power, and forgetting is death." The bell's surface shimmered, its bronze turned translucent. Inside, shapes moved, faces without features, gestures forming prayers without purpose. He felt their confusion like an ache in his own ribs. "You were meant to guide us," he said softly. "Not follow." The voice sighed. We were never above you, only louder. But we grew tired of listening to grief. You gave us silence, and we mistook it for praise. He bowed lower. Then learn from us again. Begin small. How? He raised his hand, palm open. By saying mercy and meaning it. The bell pulsed once. A low hum filled the temple, so deep it blurred thought. When it faded, the character on its skin changed. Mercy. The light in the bronze dimmed to an ember's warmth. From the valley came shouts, the villagers pointing toward the river. He hurried outside. The water had changed direction, flowing backward toward the mountains. Its surface shimmered with faint script. The same word, repeated again and again. Mercy, 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 until the letters dissolved into foam. The people fell to their knees, weeping with relief they couldn't explain. The monk alone stayed standing. He knew this wasn't blessing, but learning, the god rehearsing its first word in centuries, the way a child might. At dusk, he sat by the bell and listened to it murmur through the metal. We remember how to listen now, it said. Teach us how to forget what should be forgotten. He thought for a long time. Some things must remain, he answered, even sorrow, or there will be nothing left to forgive. The bronze cooled under his touch. In the silence that followed, the bell seemed content. But when he left the hall, the echo of its hum followed him into sleep, gentle, curious, almost human. That night, he dreamed of standing again between two bells, the temples and the mountains. This time a third one waited behind him, smaller, made of light. It pulsed like a heartbeat, asking without words, if gods can forget, who remembers you? He woke before dawn with tears he didn't remember shedding and the taste of metal and honey in his mouth. The bell was quiet. Outside, the mist curled away, revealing a sky too bright for the hour, as if someone had rung morning too early. Chapter 5. The Man Who Taught the Sky to Pray. The morning came too soon. The sky above the valley glowed the color of tarnished brass, as if dawn had learned its hue from the bell itself. The villagers waited at their doors, whispering that the light looked backwards, as though the sun had forgotten which side to rise from. The monk stood in the courtyard and felt the world's pulse hesitate. A long collective inhale that the air refused to finish. He returned to the bell. It hung motionless, but warmth spread through the floorboards like a secret carried in veins. You have learned mercy, he said. What now? A pause, then the voice, smaller, more deliberate. We want to learn prayer. He frowned. You were born from prayer. No, said the metal, trembling like skin touched by breath. We were born from fear disguised as faith. Teach us how to speak to silence without demanding an answer. He touched the rim. Prayer is not asking, it is remembering what deserves to exist. The bronze brightened. A hum rose from deep within, low enough to turn his ribs to glass. The echo spilled outward, folding the valley into stillness. Rivers halted mid-flow. Wind paused between trees. Every sound became the bell's single word, repeated infinitely in every direction. Remember. The people dropped their tools and knelt, not in worship, but in recognition. For a moment the air and the earth shared one heartbeat. When the hum faded, the world began again, gently, as if waking from a long fever. He stood in the aftersound and felt his shadow detach from the stones. It bowed once, then drifted toward the mountains, drawn by the same light that had taught the bell its tone. He did not stop it. He simply whispered, Go where sound becomes thought. At twilight, the villagers climbed to the temple, carrying lanterns. They found him seated beneath the bell, eyes closed, hands folded in his lap. The metal above him gleamed with a new inscription burned into its skin. When man remembers, gods listen. They buried him beside the stairway that faced the rising sun. The next morning the bell rang once by itself, soft, sure, content, and the sky, as though paying attention for the first time, answered not with thunder, but with rain shaped like prayer beads falling slow and even. From then on, the villagers said the world had learned a new language. When storms gathered, they rang small bells in their doorways, not to beg the heavens, but to remind them to listen kindly. They called it the monk's prayer. And in the quiet, after each ringing, if one listened closely enough, the echo always came back faint but faithful. The voice of the wrong god, now right again, whispering the first word it ever learned: mercy. Closing. He rang the temple bell, and the gods answered wrong. They say the sound of that bell never faded. It only slowed, stretching itself thin across centuries until it became silence. And in that silence, the gods finally learned what the monk had meant, that prayer was never about being heard but about remembering how to listen. Some travelers still claim to hear the echo when rain falls in copper gutters or when thunder hesitates before breaking. They say it's the sky practicing kindness, repeating a word it once forgot. And when they look toward the valley where the temple used to stand, they see the light shimmer as if the world itself were taking a breath. If you hear that breath tonight, don't be afraid to answer. Just close your eyes and whisper the only word the monk left behind, the one even the gods had to learn to say: mercy.